wish that you please come.
Yeah. Thank you. Please sit. Good morning, and thank you, Deputy Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen who are in the course, and our friends from the United Kingdom. This is perhaps the most important address that I've delivered in my public life since my capitulation to the attacks on the government's proposals to join the CSME in 2005. I consider you to be important actors in the future of the Bahamas. In my many roles in public life, from 1992 to now, from my work as a journalist from 1970 to 1986, and then my work as a lawyer from 1986 to 1992, when I entered Parliament for the first time, I consider this statement this morning to be of critical importance. Let me start by thanking the Police College and your instructors from the United Kingdom who are here in the Bahamas for this course. And I thank you most sincerely. And we meet at the Police College, which was the gift of the British government to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas upon our independence. I thank the leadership of the Royal Bahamas Police Force for allowing this course to proceed and for the kind invitation for me to offer these concluding remarks. In fact, I prefer the word commencement to describe this occasion. This is not an end, it is a beginning. And I want to also apologize for the length of this presentation. When I was here 2 days ago, I indicated that I had a long personal history with the Royal Bahamas Police Force. In fact, I was around when it was not the Royal Bahamas Police Force, just the police force. I had a maternal uncle, his name was Siegfried Wilson, who was a superintendent on the force. I had another paternal uncle who rose to be deputy commissioner on the force. His name was Wenzel Granger. And Major Granger, he'd served in the Second World War in the British Army, became a major, lived in the building that was formerly the headquarters for the Security and Intelligence Branch at police headquarters. And I spent my days after primary school at that home doing my homework and playing in the police yard. I had to tell you that Major Granger was quite a disciplinarian. The story is told of a force order that said that civilians were not to ride in a police car. So his equerry was driving up East Street to the barracks in the pouring rain, met Mrs. Granger walking and being soaked, and the equerry collected Mrs. Granger. When he dropped her off, he was put on a charge immediately. And explanation, well, she was getting wet. Mr. Granger said, "Is she a civilian or is she a police officer? Civilians are not supposed to be driven in the car." That was Wenzel Granger. My very good friend, the late Sir Albert Miller, who also became Deputy Commissioner of Police, lived in a house at the back of the police yard. Now, Sir Albert Miller had one regret in his life, and that was that he did not become Commissioner of Police. And that was largely due to regime change in 1967. It was known that when the PLP came to office, Salathiel Thompson would become the Commissioner of Police. Sir Albert was closer to the previous regime, and he always talked about that regret, but in the end, he was still hugely successful. And I repeat the story because you, as future leaders of the force, should come to understand the real politic of being on the force if you don't already know. Now, I got to introduce my police aides to Sir Albert Miller before he died. He started out as a recruit from Long Island and ended up as Deputy Commissioner of Police, and then became one of the country's most successful businessmen, first as chair of the Grand Bahama Port Authority, and later as the chairman of Focal and the Sunshine Oil Group. Through those introductions, I was hoping to inspire them about where they could end up and how they can succeed from the humblest beginnings. I mentioned when I was here at my meeting 2 days ago my association with Grafton Eiffel Sr., who served as Assistant Commissioner of Police in Freeport, and after whom the conference room of the new SIB headquarters has been named. Mr. Eiffel and I met regularly when he ran the force in Freeport, and he told me that for the police force to be successful, it had to recruit men and women from each birth cohort, because the police force had to be able to tap into each generation of its citizens. When I moved back to Nassau, the then Commissioner of Police was Bernard Bonamy, and he befriended me. He had joined as a constable under the commissionership of Colchester Wims, and he patterned his conduct after Colchester Wims. So one of the practices during the time he was commissioner was the tea break at 11 a.m. each morning. Each morning, the upper echelons of the force, led by the commissioner, would single file with their sticks under their hats to the senior mess for tea, complete with officers serving tea with linen napkins and shell jackets. And that was every day. And Idris Reed, who was the permanent secretary at the time, said it was a serious mistake to call the commissioner during tea time. He was ordered not to be disturbed. It was quite a privilege to enjoy and witness as a young man. These relationships were invaluable in shaping my views about public life and public policy. And there are others who helped to shape my view and association with the force, like retired Superintendent and now Anglican priest Rodney Burrows, who was Mr. Bonamy's staff officer, and retired Deputy Superintendent of Police Michael Ellis, and retired Assistant Superintendent of Police Henry Wims. Mr. Wims has just written a book about his life, and I urge you to buy it if you have not already gotten a copy. I developed a relationship with Paul Rowe when he was commissioner, and he reminded me that I had helped him when he was a student at the University of the Bahamas, then the college, going through law school. And now, today, he serves as one of our ambassadors overseas. One of the lessons here, then, is relationships matter. And I wish at this juncture to pay tribute to the women on the force. I remember when they first started in 1964, 60 years ago. I met the first female recruit at a function in my constituency last night, her name, Anita Bethel Williams. And I salute her today and all the other women who have served, and thank you for your service. This necessary walk down memory lane is to reinforce the value I place on relationships with the Royal Bahamas Police Force. I consider it the bulwark of national security. In fact, Mr. Eiffel, who spoke at the commissioning ceremony, spoke to the role in particular of the Security and Intelligence Branch in the conduct of the nation's security. In fact, that is the branch with which I am most associated because they are responsible for my personal safety and the conduct of my public life in most intimate details. Much of my work as a minister could not be possible without their participation, input, and management, for which I am deeply grateful. The force is supposed to be politically neutral. However, we know the real politic of which I spoke. And neutral means only in this respect: you serve the government of the day, regardless of what your personal political views are. I've been around for all of the transitions from one prime minister to another, from Pinling to Ingram, Ingram to Christie, Christie to Ingram, and Ingram to Christie, and Christie to Minnis, and Minnis to Davis. Those transitions have been seamless and peaceful. Order was maintained, and the transfer of power successful. When elections come around, the force has a unique capability and capacity to predict the future. I repeat the story of how impressed I was in 2002 when I first came to office as a minister, with the independence celebrations looming and the fact that all the planning had already been executed by the force. The elections took place in May, independence in July, so we wondered how was it all going to be executed. But the force and the civil servants had done all the work, and it was left to us only to step up to the plate and perform our roles because the planning had already been done. I was similarly impressed when the Four Seasons project was being built in Exuma, which meant that a casino was coming to Exuma for the first time. And the officer in charge told me how the commissioner would be sending in officers from the commercial crime section because, in their planning, they had anticipated that with a casino coming, commercial crime might become a new dimension of criminal activity that was not then present in Exuma. These might seem rather pedestrian references, but the point is that the force is supposed to be an island of stability amidst a sea of troubles, always thinking ahead, planning ahead, and maintaining ahead when all the rest of us might be losing our heads. It is against this background of that last comment that I wish to address the present public issues. You've heard me say, with regard to all the recent assaults on the force, perhaps to my personal political detriment, that we cannot afford for the force to be trashed. It is all we have. We have to clean up any corruption or perceptions of the same, but we cannot do so by throwing the baby out with the bathwater, or allow the force to be defined by actions of a few actors. One of the reasons you're in this course is to help reinforce the institutional nature of this job and the role in governance of the Bahamas. It is to assist you in reinforcing your personal sense of self-worth and your integrity and the commitment to integrity. I think when I act and before I act in my public life of what my brothers, my sisters, my nephews and nieces and other relatives and friends, including my deceased parents, mother and father, what would they have thought and said before I act? Because my actions determine in many respects what other people will think of them. Similarly, I can well imagine what you're all going through with regard to some of the sweeping generalizations and inartful commentary that is passing around about the force and its men and women because of the actions of particular alleged bad actors. But I say this again, each man or woman is responsible for their own personal conduct. They stand or fall on their actions. While the actions of others can reflect upon you, they should not sap your will to be true to yourselves and to the doctrines of integrity. The Prime Minister said the tree will be shaken until the bad apples fall. I support this. However, whatever happens to the Royal Bahamas Police Force, it must survive with its integrity intact. I do not accept any description that says the force is systemically corrupt. The force does not, in my view, stand condemned by bad actors, but it is our job to weed out those bad actors. And I also caution in all matters to hear the other side and do not accept uncritically anything that is asserted in these days and times. There are bad actors in every system and country. No one has a monopoly on virtue, and no country is free of corruption, big countries as well as small. There is, of course, the issue in this world of one rule for one group and another rule for another group. And very often, the country to which you belong, a small island developing state, is subject to doctrines of a double standard and constantly moving goalposts. This reinforces my personal view, which is this: I can't stop anyone who's more powerful than me, richer than me, smarter than me. I can only account for my own behavior and integrity. I start always from the position that if you do what you do what you have to do, and I'll do what's in my best interest. The Christian Bible says it this way: as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. There are a few other observations I'd like to make. If you have not seen the movie Bull Durham with Kevin Costner, I think it's worth seeing, if only for this. It is about a baseball player in the minor leagues trying to get to the major leagues in American baseball. Kevin, who's the protagonist in the movie, will not ever get to the majors, but he's able to coach and mentor a talented player who will. He coaches the player, a pitcher, about how to speak to the media. He tells him that you are the spokesman for your sport. So when you speak to the media, you have to remember that you speak not just for yourself, but you speak for your profession. You should remember that as police officers. Although you're not politicians, as leaders of the force, you are public figures and subject to public scrutiny and commentary. When you appear in public, remember, dress, language, image is sometimes everything. When you speak for the force and for yourselves. One of my aides was accompanying me on a visit to Sandlands Primary School. And when the visit was finished, he informed me that one of the little boys in school came up to him and said, "You have the best job in the world, don't you?" On another occasion, we were in a grocery store in Fox Hill, and 3 adolescent boys were standing watching the police aide as he watched me. And they all said to him one day they wanted to be a bodyguard just like him. And they wondered how could they get the job. And he told them, well, the first thing is you can't stand up with your hands folded if you're a protection officer. So they immediately changed their behavior and posture so they could stand up like he was standing. I told an earlier group of officers who worked with me how close protection, being an aide-de-camp or equerry, is a well-worn path to success in the force. If you all remember, Paul Foxson ended up being the Commissioner of Police, and he was once the aide-de-camp to the Governor General, Sir Gerald Cash. I also make this observation, and I thank the police officer from Atlanta, whom I met a few days ago at a trade show here. She told me how things have changed in the way policing commanders work in her city. She said that when she joined the force, you did as you were told and never questioned your leaders. However, with the new generation of officers, they always had questions whenever an order was given. And she had to get used to that and learn as a commanding officer to bite her tongue. We spoke about the differences between how we were raised as children and how you in your generation and below were raised. I was raised not to question my parents. One of my mother and father's favorite expressions was, "because I said so." So, when my contemporaries raised their children, they were raised in a more democratic and participatory fashion. They were able to question what their parents said. That means that you and those who come after you now question everything, and everything is subject to scrutiny. So policing has to adjust to that aspect of public life. There's the general election, which is coming 658 days from today. The language of politics is more emotive and even violent today. That means our election campaign, security, and policing has to adjust to those new realities. God help us that we avoid any political violence in this country. But the police force should be examining and thinking about the general election and what the new security thrusts will have to be to meet what is now being signaled about the future for politics and political action. The fact that the House of Assembly is unable to provide security of the person of members of Parliament today, where an activist can barge into the House of Assembly, interrupt the press conference of the leader of the opposition, and there's no deterrent or sanction possible or available. And there's a clear rule, a clear law, that a member of Parliament is to have free and unimpeded access to the House of Assembly. Lastly, I wish to discuss the international environment. The Bahamas as a country and population is not even as large as Dade County in Florida in the United States. In the scheme of a $1 trillion economy like our neighbor to the north, the Bahamas is small potatoes. And notwithstanding the public face that is put on when we meet face to face with other nations, the realities of how we are treated are oftentimes different. And as a small nation, we are forced to bite our tongues in the face of some outlandish claims. Lyndon Pindling faced the same issue in 1984. When the United States authorities make a claim, your countrymen usually accept uncritically what they say. And any government that seems to oppose what they say, your countrymen get concerned that the pre-clearance will be lost to the Bahamas. And that's just a start. Some of that is playing out today. Here's what former Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Trudeau, said about life next to the United States. I quote, "Living next to the United States is in some ways like sleeping with an elephant. No matter how friendly and even-tempered the beast, one is affected by every twitch and grunt." Former Deputy Prime Minister and Governor General Arthur Hanna said it this way to a visiting South Korean ambassador: "We're both nestled next to giants, and we're only as independent as the giants allow." I was in law school in 1984 in the UK when the Commission of Inquiry reported on similar allegations as those made today by the American media about drug corruption in the Bahamas. I received a call from my late friend Loftus Roca to tell me that following a come-to-Jesus moment of the PLP at Chub Key, Prime Minister Pinling had decided to reorganize the government, and that as a consequence, the new Ministry of National Security was to be created with Loftus Roca as its first head. That Hubert Ingram and Perry Christie would be fired, that Arthur Hanna was resigning from the government, that Kendall Nottage and George Smith would be asked to resign. I called Beryl Hanna, the wife of Mr. Hanna and mother of now Minister Glenys Hanna Martin, who's my very good friend, to warn her of what was coming. I then called Paul Adley, who was at the United Nations. He was our Minister of Foreign Affairs then in New York, and asked him, I said, "What are you going to do in the face of these changes that are coming, and the fact that Mr. Hanna, in particular, the Deputy Prime Minister, is leaving the government in the face of the proposed reorganization?" Mr. Adley told me he was weighing his decision, but he said, "Pinling is going to win, and I want to remain in public life. The rest is history." In the present circumstances, I do not expect any such drama, but clearly there is a call for something of a dramatic nature to be done, and it might involve the institution of which you are part and of which you are being called to lead today and in the future. I hope to be a part of whatever the Prime Minister decides in the face of these present realities, and will make my views known in the appropriate forum. But I leave you with this final admonition, and it's not an original thought. It comes from the musician Stevie S., and he says this: hold your head. Hold your head. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless the future and the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you.